He thought he'd found the love of his life, young, beautiful, and full of promise. 7 days after saying, "I do," Robert discovered his dream bride wasn't 20 years old, she was 45, and within hours, she was dead, stabbed 8 times in their kitchen. This is the story of a man who left everything behind for a fantasy, and the woman who paid the ultimate price for selling him that lie. How does a whirlwind romance turn into bloodshed in just 1 week? What kind of secret makes a man lose his mind completely? And most importantly, who was the woman Robert really married? Because the truth behind this marriage is something no one saw coming. Welcome to Silent Witness True Crime Stories. Thanks to all my viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay tuned for daily true crime updates. Don't forget to subscribe, and also download your free ebook by clicking the link in the pinned comment. Robert Gaines, 52 years old, a Florida real estate agent known throughout Tampa Bay for his easy charm and his almost desperate obsession with staying young. Gym selfies at dawn, sports cars he couldn't quite afford, nights out with friends half his age. And then there was Sierra, the mysterious 20-year-old he met on a dating app one humid August evening, or so he thought. Who was Sierra really? What secret was she hiding behind those filtered photos and carefully crafted messages? And why did Robert lose control when he found out the truth? Over the next hour, we're going to unpack one of Florida's most disturbing cases of deception, obsession, and murder. A case that asks uncomfortable questions about identity, pride, and what happens when the person you think you know turns out to be someone else entirely. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand Robert Gaines. Born and raised in Clearwater, Florida, Robert was the kind of man who never quite accepted that time was moving forward. His first marriage ended when he was 32, a quick courthouse ceremony that dissolved even quicker. His second marriage to Linda, a schoolteacher from Tampa, lasted 18 years. They had no children, but they had routines. Friday night dinners, Sunday morning walks on the beach. A mortgage they were halfway through paying off. But somewhere around his 50th birthday, Robert started pulling away. He joined a new gym, started posting shirtless photos online with captions about living your best life and age is just a number. His friends noticed the change. One coworker later said, Robert wanted to feel alive again. He'd look in the mirror and see his father staring back. That terrified him. Within 6 months, he'd moved out. Linda was devastated, but not entirely surprised. "He told me he needed to find himself," she said in a later interview. "I just didn't know that meant finding someone young enough to be his daughter." Robert threw himself into online dating with the intensity of a man on a mission. He updated his profile to say he was 45 instead of 52, posted photos from 5 years earlier, swiped through hundreds of profiles looking for someone who could make him feel the way he used to feel. And then, one night in late August, he matched with Sierra. Her profile said she was 20 years old, a photography student originally from Atlanta, new to Florida, and looking to meet people. Her photos showed a young woman with long dark hair, bright eyes, and a smile that seemed genuine. They started talking immediately, long conversations that stretched past midnight. She laughed at his jokes, shared his taste in music, told him she loved older men because they were more mature, more stable. Within 2 weeks, they met for coffee. Within a month, Robert told his friends he was in love. "She makes me feel young again," he told anyone who would listen. "She sees me for who I really am." But let's talk about Sierra. Or rather, let's talk about who Sierra really was. Her real name was Monica Latham, and she wasn't 20 years old. She was 45, exactly 3 years younger than Robert himself. Monica had grown up in a small town in Alabama, the youngest of 4 sisters. She'd been a beauty pageant contestant in her teens, won a few local titles, and married young to her high school sweetheart. That marriage lasted 12 years before falling apart under the weight of financial stress and infidelity. After the divorce, Monica struggled. She worked at a salon, barely making rent. Her credit was destroyed, her confidence was shattered, And somewhere along the way, she discovered that online, she could be anyone. With the right filters, the right angles, the right lighting, she could look 25 again, maybe even 20. She started experimenting with dating apps, shaving years off her age at first, then a decade, then more. She told herself it was harmless, just a way to meet people, just a way to feel desired again. But the lies grew. She created entire backstories, fake colleges, fake careers, fake addresses, and men believed her. They wanted to believe her. When Monica matched with Robert, she saw an opportunity. He was desperate to feel young, and she was desperate to feel wanted. It seemed like a perfect fit. Their first date went better than either of them expected. Robert was charming, attentive, generous. Monica played her part perfectly. She laughed at the right moments, asked questions that made him feel interesting, let him pay for everything without protest. Within weeks, Robert was talking about moving in together. Within 2 months, he proposed. Monica said yes, even though a voice in the back of her mind whispered that this couldn't last. She knew eventually he'd find out, but she told herself she'd figure it out when the time came. Maybe by then he'd love her enough that the age wouldn't matter. Maybe he'd understand. On a warm October afternoon, they got married in a small beach ceremony in Clearwater. 20 guests, cheap champagne, a photographer Monica found on Craigslist. Robert beamed the entire time, holding her hand like she might disappear if he let go. But some of the guests whispered among themselves. "She looks older than 20, don't you think?" one cousin said to another. "Look at her hands. Look at her neck." Robert didn't notice, or maybe he didn't want to notice. He was too caught up in the fantasy he'd built for himself. The first week of marriage was everything Robert had imagined. They stayed in a small rented house near the beach, played house, talked about the future. Monica cooked dinner every night. Robert came home from work with flowers. They posted photos online with captions about newlywed bliss and finding your soulmate later in life. But on day 8, everything changed. Robert was at his office when a coworker, scrolling through Facebook during lunch, stumbled across something strange. A photo tagged with Monica's name, but from 15 years earlier. The woman in the photo looked nearly identical to the woman Robert had just married. The coworker showed it to another colleague. They started digging. More photos, more timelines. A LinkedIn profile that listed Monica as graduating college in 2002. The math didn't add up. By the end of the workday, Robert's phone was buzzing with messages. "Hey man, you need to see this. Is this your wife? How old did she say she was?" Robert stared at his phone in the parking lot, his hands shaking. He pulled up every social media account he could find, searched her name in public records, found a marriage license from 2008 listing her age as 31. His chest tightened, his vision blurred. The woman he'd left his wife for, the woman he'd married, the woman he'd built his entire new life around, had been lying to him from the very beginning. He drove home in silence, his mind racing through every conversation they'd ever had, every detail she'd shared, wondering what else had been a lie. When he walked through the door, Monica was in the kitchen making dinner. She smiled when she saw him, that same bright smile that had first caught his attention, but now all Robert could see was the deception behind it. "We need to talk," he said, his voice cold. Monica's smile faded. She knew immediately. "Robert, I can explain," she started, but he cut her off. "How old are you? Your real age?" The silence that followed felt like it lasted hours. Monica's eyes filled with tears. "I'm 45, she whispered. The words hit Robert like a physical blow. 45, not 20, not even 30. 45, older than Linda, older than the life he'd thrown away. "You lied to me," he said, his voice rising, "about everything. Your age, your name, your entire life. Who are you?" Monica tried to explain, tried to tell him that she'd fallen in love with him, that the age didn't matter, that they could work through this. But Robert wasn't hearing her. All he could hear was the echo of his own voice telling his friends, his family, his ex-wife, that he'd found someone young and beautiful who made him feel alive. All he could see was the embarrassment, the humiliation, the realization that he'd been played for a fool. The neighbors later reported hearing raised voices around 8 p.m., shouting, something breaking, then a scream, then silence. When police arrived at the house the next morning after a welfare check requested by Monica's sister, they found the front door unlocked. Inside, they found Monica's body in the kitchen, sprawled near the refrigerator. She'd been stabbed 8 times. Defensive wounds on her hands suggested she'd tried to fight back. Blood spatter indicated the attack had been sudden and violent, and Robert was gone. His car was missing. His phone was off. A manhunt began immediately. Police issued a statewide alert. Robert Gaines, 52 years old, approximately 6 feet tall, last seen wearing jeans and a gray shirt, considered armed and dangerous. News vans parked outside the house. Reporters interviewed neighbors who said they'd seemed like a happy couple. Detectives began piecing together the timeline, discovering the age deception, the fake identity, the elaborate lies Monica had told. The media jumped on the story. Florida man murders bride after discovering she lied about her age. Catfish romance turns deadly. When online dating goes wrong. But beneath the sensational headlines was a much darker, more complicated truth. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with, "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. The investigation moved quickly. Detectives interviewed everyone who knew Robert and Monica, building a picture of 2 people caught in a web of lies and desperation. Robert's ex-wife Linda spoke to investigators, her voice steady but sad. "He called me the night before it happened," she told them. "He said he'd made a terrible mistake leaving me, that he didn't know who he was anymore. I told him it was too late. I'd moved on." Robert's co-workers described a man obsessed with youth and image. "He'd joke about being mistaken for 35, one colleague said. But you could tell it wasn't really a joke. It mattered to him deeply. Monica's family painted a picture of a woman struggling with her own identity. Her older sister revealed that Monica had been using fake names and ages online for years. She couldn't accept getting older, the sister explained. Every birthday was like a funeral to her. When she turned 40, she stopped celebrating altogether. Police discovered Monica had been using dating apps under multiple identities. Sierra was just one of several personas. There was also Amber, supposedly 23, and Jessica, supposedly 28. Each profile had carefully selected photos, edited and filtered to take years off her appearance. Meanwhile, the search for Robert intensified. A gas station attendant in Georgia reported seeing someone matching his description, but the lead went nowhere. A burner phone was traced to a location near the Everglades, suggesting Robert might be hiding in the vast wilderness. Dive teams searched canals and waterways. Helicopters scanned the dense vegetation. Days turned into weeks with no sign of him. Then investigators made a discovery that complicated the narrative even further. Monica's real name wasn't Monica Latham at all. It was Angela Morris, and she'd stolen the identity of a real Monica Latham years earlier after bankruptcy destroyed her credit. The real Monica Latham, contacted by police, was shocked to learn her identity had been used. "I've never even been to Florida," she said. "I don't understand how this happened." Angela Morris, they discovered, had a history of financial fraud, unpaid debts, eviction notices, a trail of broken leases and angry landlords. She'd reinvented herself multiple times, each time shedding her past like a snake shedding skin. The woman Robert married wasn't just lying about her age. She was lying about her entire existence. False leads continued to plague the investigation. An anonymous tip claimed Robert had been spotted in Alabama, alive and working under a fake name. Another caller insisted Monica's ex-husband had been involved in her death, that this was a setup. Detectives chased every lead, working 18-hour days, desperate for a break in the case. Then, 2 weeks after the murder, a fisherman in the Everglades called 911. He'd spotted a car submerged in a canal off Route 41, barely visible beneath the murky water. Dive teams pulled the vehicle out the next morning. It was Robert's silver Honda Accord. Inside, slumped in the driver's seat, was Robert's body. He'd been dead for days, maybe longer. Cause of death appeared to be suicide. A single gunshot wound to the head. A gun was found in the car along with a handwritten note on crumpled notebook paper. The note was brief, written in shaky handwriting. She made a fool of me. I lost everything over a lie. I can't face what I've done. Tell Linda I'm sorry. Investigators found something else in the car. Wedding photos scattered across the passenger seat. In one photo, circled in red ink, was Monica's hand, her skin showing the telltale signs of age that Robert had apparently missed until it was too late. But the investigation wasn't over. Detectives wanted to understand Robert's movements in those 2 weeks between the murder and his death. Cell phone records and witness statements revealed that Robert had been alive for at least a week after killing Monica. He'd driven south, stopping at rest areas and sleeping in his car. He'd called his best friend, a man named Tom, 3 days after the murder. Tom later told investigators about that conversation. He was crying, Tom said. He told me he'd done something terrible, that he'd hurt Monica. I didn't know she was dead at that point. I thought maybe they'd just had a bad fight. I told him to turn himself in, to get help. He said he would. But then he asked me something strange. He asked me if I thought a person could ever really know another person, or if we're all just pretending to be what others want to see. Tom admitted he'd briefly considered helping Robert hide. He was my best friend for 20 years, but I knew I couldn't. I told him I'd give him 1 day to turn himself in before I called the police myself. Robert never turned himself in. Instead, he drove deeper into the Everglades, bought a handgun from a private seller using cash, and ended his life alone in his car. The note Robert left behind was short, but it led investigators down a new path. When forensic analysts examined the wedding photos found in Robert's car, they noticed something unusual. One photo appeared to be from a different wedding entirely. Same dress, same woman, but different groom. Investigators tracked down the photographer who'd shot Robert and Monica's wedding. She confirmed she'd only taken about 50 photos that day. So where did this extra photo come from? The answer opened up an entirely new dimension to the case. Angela Morris had done this before. Not the murder, but the deception. The photo was from another wedding, 2 years earlier, in Louisiana. Angela had married a man named David, a 60-year-old retired accountant. She'd told him she was 26. That marriage lasted 3 months before David discovered her real age through a chance encounter with someone who'd known Angela in high school. David had the marriage annulled and filed a police report for fraud, but Angela disappeared before charges could be filed. Investigators discovered there was another incident before that. 5 years earlier in Tennessee, Angela had dated a man named Michael for nearly a year, claiming to be 30 years old when she was actually 40. When Michael discovered the truth, he ended the relationship immediately, but he never reported it to police. Interviewed by Florida detectives, Michael was still angry years later. "She stole a year of my life," he said. "I introduced her to my family, my kids. I was planning to propose. And the whole time, everything about her was fiction." The pattern was clear. Angela had been doing this for years, targeting older men online, creating elaborate fake identities, and maintaining the deception for as long as possible. What investigators couldn't determine was why. Was it purely financial, targeting men with money and stability? Was it psychological, an inability to accept her own aging? Or was it something else entirely, a desperate need to be seen and desired that overrode everything else? Angela's sister provided some insight when investigators interviewed her again. After her divorce, something broke in Angela, she explained. She'd built her entire identity around being beautiful and young. She'd won pageants, modeled locally. Men had always paid attention to her. When that started to fade, when she started seeing wrinkles and gray hair, she couldn't handle it. She became obsessed with looking young, spent money she didn't have on creams and procedures, and when that wasn't enough, she just started lying about it. The sister revealed something else. Angela had kept a journal, found by police during a search of her belongings. In it, Angela wrote extensively about her fears of becoming invisible. "I walked through a mall today, and no one looked at me," one entry read. "I used to turn heads everywhere I went. Now I'm just another middle-aged woman people look through instead of at. I can't live like this. I won't." The journal entries became darker over time. Angela wrote about creating her first fake profile, the rush she felt when younger men responded, the validation of being desired again. "Online, I can be 25 forever," she wrote. "I can be anyone I want to be. And for the first time in years, I feel alive." But there were also entries filled with guilt and self-awareness. "I know what I'm doing is wrong," she wrote 6 months before meeting Robert. "I know these men would hate me if they knew the truth. But I tell myself I'll come clean eventually. I'll tell them when they love me enough that it won't matter, except it always matters. It always ends, and I'm always alone again." Reading these entries, investigators began to see Angela not as a simple con artist, but as someone trapped in her own psychological prison, unable to accept reality, unable to move forward. One detective involved in the case later said, "She wasn't trying to steal money or ruin lives. She was trying to escape from herself, and she dragged Robert into that escape with her." But there was one more twist investigators hadn't anticipated. Among Angela's belongings, they found evidence of another identity she'd been building. A new profile on a different dating app, this one claiming to be 18 years old, a freshman in college. The profile had been active until the day she died. Angela had been planning her next deception even while married to Robert. This discovery changed how investigators viewed the case. Was Angela planning to leave Robert eventually? Had she ever intended for this marriage to last? Or was she so addicted to the deception that she couldn't stop even when she'd found someone willing to marry her? These questions would never be fully answered. What was clear was that Angela's death wasn't just the result of Robert's violence. It was the culmination of years of lies catching up with her, the inevitable collision of fantasy and reality. As the investigation drew to a close, one final piece of the puzzle emerged. Robert's best friend Tom came forward with additional information he'd initially kept to himself. In that phone call 3 days after the murder, Robert had said something Tom hadn't shared with police at first. "She told me she loved me," Robert had said, his voice breaking. "Even at the end, when I confronted her, when I had the knife in my hand, she said she loved me and that she was sorry. And I think that's what made it worse. Because maybe she did love me. Maybe underneath all the lies, there was something real. But I'd already decided she was nothing but a fraud. I'd already made her into a villain in my mind, and I couldn't take it back." Tom struggled with whether to share this information. "It made Robert sound sympathetic," Tom explained, "like he was some victim who'd been pushed too far. But he wasn't a victim. He killed her. Nothing justifies that." The detail added complexity to an already complicated case. Had there been genuine feeling between Robert and Angela beneath the layers of deception and desperation? Or was that just another layer of manipulation? Psychologists who studied the case later suggested that both things could be true simultaneously. People are capable of genuine emotion even while engaged in deceptive behavior, one forensic psychologist explained. Angela could have truly loved Robert while also lying to him about fundamental aspects of her identity. The two aren't mutually exclusive. Human beings are complicated, contradictory creatures. What made Robert snap wasn't just the discovery of Angela's age. It was the complete collapse of his self-image. He'd left a stable marriage, a comfortable life, and his reputation, all for a fantasy of youth and vitality. When that fantasy shattered, everything he'd sacrificed suddenly seemed pointless. The embarrassment, the shame, the realization that his friends and family had been right all along, it was more than he could process. Robert's ex-wife Linda provided perhaps the most insightful perspective when interviewed months after the tragedy. "Robert didn't die because Angela lied," she said quietly. "He died because he couldn't forgive being fooled. His pride mattered more to him than anything else, more than his marriage to me, more than Angela's life, more than his own life. He built his entire identity around being desirable, being young, being in control. When that image cracked, there was nothing underneath to hold him together." Linda paused before continuing. "I spent 18 years with Robert. I knew who he was. He was vain. He was insecure. He needed constant validation. But he wasn't a murderer. Not the Robert I knew. What happened to him? What he became in those final days? That's what happens when you build your life on a foundation of lies and image instead of something real. Eventually, it all comes crashing down." The case officially closed 6 months after Angela's death and Robert's suicide. No charges could be filed against a dead man. Angela's identity fraud was noted in the record, but considered secondary to the murder. Her family buried her under her real name, Angela Morris, in a small cemetery in Alabama. The funeral was attended by fewer than a dozen people. Her sister gave a brief eulogy. "My sister spent her whole life running from who she was," she said. "She was so afraid of becoming invisible that she made herself into whoever she thought people wanted to see. And in the end, nobody really knew her at all, not even herself." Robert's funeral was similarly small. Linda attended, though she stood at the back and left before anyone could speak to her. Some of Robert's colleagues from work came. Tom gave a eulogy that focused on the Robert he'd known before all this happened. The friend who helped him move, the guy who remembered everyone's birthday, the person who existed before desperation and vanity consumed him. But the story didn't end with those 2 funerals. The case sparked conversations across the country about online dating, identity fraud, and the dangerous intersection of technology and human insecurity. Dating apps implemented stricter verification processes. Support groups formed for people who'd been deceived online. Mental health professionals began writing about the psychological toll of maintaining fake identities and the pressures of age discrimination, particularly for women. One article written by a therapist who'd studied the case noted, "Both Robert and Angela were victims of a culture that values youth above wisdom, appearance above substance, image above reality. They internalized those values so deeply that they destroyed each other and themselves, trying to live up to impossible standards." The question that lingered long after the case closed was whether this tragedy could have been prevented, if Robert had been more secure in himself, less desperate to prove his youth, if Angela had sought help for her psychological issues instead of retreating into lies, if our society valued people for who they are rather than how young they appear. These are uncomfortable questions without easy answers. So, what do you think happened that night in that kitchen in Clearwater, Florida? Was Robert pushed beyond reason by discovering he'd been deceived, or had he been planning this from the moment he found out the truth? Could Angela have prevented her own death by being honest from the beginning, or was Robert's violent reaction something she could never have predicted? And here's an even harder question. In a world where filters and photo editing and fake profiles are everywhere, where anyone can be anyone online, how do we protect ourselves from deception while still remaining open to connection? How do we build trust when the very platforms we use to meet people are designed to let us present idealized versions of ourselves? These aren't just questions about this specific case. They're questions about how we live now, in this digital age where identity is fluid and truth is whatever we decide to present. Think about your own life for a moment. Have you ever lied about your age online, even by a year or two? Have you ever edited a photo to look a little younger, a little thinner, a little more attractive? Have you ever presented yourself as someone you're not, even in small ways? Most of us have, and most of the time it seems harmless. But this case shows us what can happen when those small lies grow into bigger ones, when the distance between who we are and who we pretend to be becomes so vast that we lose ourselves in the gap. How would you feel if you discovered someone you loved had been lying to you about something fundamental for months or years? Could you forgive that kind of deception? And more importantly, could you forgive yourself for being deceived? These are the questions Robert faced in those final hours of his life, and he chose violence and suicide over living with the answers. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Angela deserved what happened to her? Do you have any sympathy for Robert, or was his reaction completely unjustifiable? And have you or anyone you know ever experienced something similar, where online dating led to discovering someone wasn't who they claimed to be? Share your stories. Let's have an honest conversation about these issues, because pretending they don't exist won't make them go away. If you found this story compelling and want to hear more true crime cases that make you question everything you think you know about love, trust, and identity, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Next week, we're covering another Florida case that's even stranger than this one. A woman who faked her own death to frame her husband for murder, only to have the whole plan unravel in the most unexpected way. You won't want to miss it. Until then, stay safe out there. And remember, in a world where anyone can be anyone online, the most important relationship you have is the one with yourself. Know who you are. Be honest about who you are, because the alternative, as we've seen today, can lead to tragedy.